In March of 2025, the U.S. Air Force awarded Boeing the contract to build America's next new stealth fighter, officially designated the F-47. Now, for a lot of us in the air power community, this was a welcome announcement, as that sixth-generation fighter effort had been sitting on hold for nearly a year prior to this decision, waiting for the political capital to overcome the Air Force's budgetary concerns about being able to afford the development and the production of a new high-end fighter. But during the F-47's 10-month hiatus, concerns about America falling behind in the air power arena were mostly blunted, thanks to another advanced new fighter program that's working its way towards service, one that drew its design inspiration from the very same classified X-plane program as the Air Force's effort, but that was tailored to a more multi-role mission set and the rigors of flight operations aboard an aircraft carrier, the Navy's FA-XX. Now, in the minds of some, the FA-XX effort has arguably been the more strategically important of these two sixth-generation fighter programs. China's rapidly expanding Navy and globe-leading stockpile of long-range anti-ship missiles have long placed America's carrier strike groups at a potential disadvantage, with carriers now unable to launch fighters against Chinese targets without first sailing into range of weapons like China's nuclear-capable hypersonic anti-ship glide vehicle, the DF-ZF. A new carrier-based fighter with improved stealth to survive in contested environments, the ability to coordinate constellations of AI-enabled drone wingmen, enough room to carry larger payloads, and most important of all, a big boost in fuel range, would provide the Navy's 11 multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers with the means to play a vital role in deterring a conflict with China, or failing that, and winning one. To put it in painfully stark terms, the long-term viability of America's carrier strike groups in high-end fights now rests pretty squarely on the FA-XX program's shoulders. But now the White House is saying that America can only effectively manage one new high-end fighter program at a time, shelving the Navy's FA-XX effort indefinitely to focus solely on the Air Force's Raptor replacement. And it's clear that the Navy is not very happy with this decision. So let's see if we can't parse our way through what's really going on with the Navy's FA-XX sixth-generation fighter program. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. If you watch this channel, you probably already know that War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and you can play it right now for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. You can take command of over 2,500 different airplanes, helicopters, tanks, and warships from 10 major national militaries. I'm talking platforms that range from the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to some of the best fighters and main battle tanks of today. And whether you're flying straight out of the World Wars or straight out of the Cold War, War Thunder comes with the most sophisticated vehicle damage models in gaming. We're not talking about aiming for simple boxes with hit points. We're talking about vehicles that have been modeled down to their individual components, like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew. And all of them are susceptible to damage or disabling from enemy fire. You can immerse yourself in the intense combat of War Thunder, where incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects put you behind the stick of the most powerful war machines of our time. If you're a tech nerd like me, you will love the Damage X-Ray view, where War Thunder shows you exactly what happens inside these vehicles when they're hit, showing where the round penetrated, what systems were damaged, and what ultimately caused the vehicle's destruction. Join a worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles, and delve into the intense battlefield experience that is War Thunder. With an unmatched wealth of high-quality content to discover, there's really no game better suited for fans of military tech. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or your mobile device right now by using the links in my description below. New and returning players on PC and consoles who haven't played in the last 6 months will also receive a huge bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of a premium account. It's available for a limited time only, so finish this video, but then make sure to click that button and get in on the War Thunder action. In order to really understand the various political and strategic undercurrents that are actively pulling the FAXX out to sea, we're going to have to start with a little bit of context. Because new fighter programs don't manifest in a vacuum. In a lot of ways, these high-end efforts are the result of a combination of strategic pressure, technology maturation, and the service timelines of other platforms and assets that have overlapping capabilities. Now, I tend to default to racing analogies to try to put these sorts of programs into a more down-to-earth context, so bear with me while I walk this dog. Imagine that you're the head of a racing team, and your engineers have come up with an incredible race car design that gives your team a distinct advantage over other cars in your race series. Of course, the technology to get there was expensive, and so was the upkeep, but they give you the edge you need to win, and that makes it all worth it. But as time goes on, other teams obviously start to notice how your car's design is helping you win more races. So, they not only copy your design, they begin to iterate off of it, using your advanced design as the new starting point, and then investing their own R&D budgets to find even more improvements, all while working to identify any weaknesses or vulnerabilities that are inherent to your original groundbreaking design. Of course, it takes a long time for them to reverse engineer your breakthroughs, and then even more for them to refine additional improvements. And all throughout that time, you do keep winning races, but you can read the writing on the wall. As the tech that made your car special starts becoming more commonplace, it also becomes a lot more affordable. And before long, every team in the series is incorporating some aspect of your tech into their new cars. And as these new cars enter the field, well, yours is just getting older. Before long, a few teams emerge as your most pressing threats. Teams that have demonstrated their ability to not only understand how you designed your car, but who also have the resources and the finances to work toward building an even better one. By now, your car has been racking up wins, but it's also been racking up miles, for years in fact, so not only is its competitive advantage starting to wane, but the car itself is just starting to wear out. You need a new race car, but you can't just build a new one with the old one's design. It may have been groundbreaking at the start, but now its advantages are becoming a lot more common, and it doesn't make sense to invest all that money into building a new car that may not win very many races in the not-too-distant future. So, you keep racing that old car, but behind closed doors, you go back to the drawing board and you get to work designing an even newer car. One that will, once again, give you the advantage by leapfrogging ahead of not just your previous tech, but also the later iterations of it fielded by your competitors. And it will take years to get this new car on the track, and some of the tech and the crazy ideas that you have for it might not even be entirely feasible just yet. But you are in a race against the clock, with the dire need to get this new car fielded before your old car stops winning races. And this is the same song and dance that you'll find in American fighter jet acquisitions. New fighter designs don't just iterate on the fighters that came before them, they also serve as a response to the fighters and other threats that came after their predecessors. They take years and lots of money to get into service, so you need to start working on them way before the jets they'll replace are worn out, and they need to bring new advantages to bear to make sure that they can keep winning. When people ask me why the Air Force is retiring A-10s, or why it needs new stealth bombers when we already have the B-2, these are the reasons. Because the advantages that these platforms provide aren't forever, and because all vehicles, whether we're talking about your mom's Subaru or a $2 billion flying wing, just wear out over time. And it was all the way back in 2008, just 7 years after the Super Hornet first entered service, that the US Navy started discussing its long-term need to field a replacement for its newest carrier fighter and its sister jet, the electronic warfare-focused EA-18G Growler. And this is probably the first misconception about FAXX that we need to dispel. This new fighter is not replacing the F-35C on American flat tops. The Navy operates two different types of fighters from its carriers. Currently, the F-A-18 Super Hornet and the F-35C, with the FAXX slated to replace those retiring Super Hornets sometime in the 2030s, to then fly alongside the F-35 for decades to come. In fact, in the past, I've argued that this distinction is probably why the FAXX is developing with that telltale F/A prefix. The F in FA, of course, stands for fighter, while the A stands for attack, meaning a fighter that emphasizes both air-to-air and air-to-ground operations. But modern 4th and 5th generation fighters, even specialized ones like the F-22 Raptor, are all multi-role aircraft these days, capable of conducting both air-to-air and air-to-ground operations right out of the box. The only real reason I can think of to hang on to that now dated FA prefix is to make it clear that this new jet is meant to stand in for the FA-18 and not the F-35. It wasn't until 2012 that the Navy's pursuit of a new carrier fighter started to get really serious, with the branch issuing a Request for Information, or RFI, to industry partners about an entirely new jet. According to that RFI, the Navy was looking for a new, quote, carrier-based aircraft to provide air supremacy with a multi-role strike capability in an anti-access area denied, or A2AD, operational environment. And that A2AD part is worth noting, because it's the same terminology often used to describe China's defensive strategy in the Pacific, and we'll discuss that a bit more soon. Now, the RFI lists this new fighter's primary missions as, quote, air warfare, strike warfare, surface warfare, and close air support. But it goes on to highlight the additional need for persistent operations inside the reach of enemy air defense systems, airborne electronic attack or electronic warfare, and the long list of now standard capabilities that we've come to expect out of modern high-end fighters, like air-to-air refueling and tactical reconnaissance capabilities. But maybe most notable of all, this RFI also said this new fighter could be optionally or even entirely unmanned. 2 years later, then Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, Frank Kendall, who would later become the Secretary of the Air Force, commissioned a classified DARPA study into new fighter technologies called the Dominance Initiative. And this study would dramatically shift America's vision for its next generation of fighters. Rather than focusing on designing and fielding a single new aircraft for aircraft carriers or for the air superiority mission in the Air Force's case, the study recommended developing a, quote, family of systems, with each crewed fighter accompanied by AI-enabled drone wingmen, all of which could leverage data from a variety of new sensors and engage targets with a variety of new networked weapons. Now, this study then directly led to a classified billion-dollar X-plane program called Next Generation Air Dominance, which ultimately produced 2 flying technology demonstrators, one of which was said to be setting some kinds of performance records by 2020. Now, that X-plane program, which drew funding from DARPA, the Air Force, and the Navy, then became the basis for separate but parallel new fighter programs being developed for each branch. But rather than being 2 entirely different aircraft, both of these efforts seem to mature under the expectation that while the airframes and manufacturers may not be the same, a fair portion of the modular subsystems in these new jets would be. Now, this would allow both branches to avoid the expensive process of trying to create one new fighter design that could meet the very different needs of each branch, while still saving on the development of things like avionics, AI flight control systems, and more. The Air Force needed a new air superiority fighter to replace its endangered fleet of F-22 Raptors, which may still be highly capable but are too old and too few to rely on alone in a high-end fight with a nation like China. With Raptor production sunsetting in 2011 after just 186 jets were produced, the US has no way to replace Raptor losses, and these air superiority jets are already outnumbered by Chinese J-20s. To make matters worse, China currently has at least 2 new stealth fighters in active development that may be even harder to detect and target than the F-22. If the US wants to continue owning the skies as it has for decades, it needs a new top-tier fighter to secure that airspace. But for the Navy, this new fighter effort was never about just adding new capabilities to the carrier air wing alone. In a real way, it was about keeping America's aircraft carriers relevant in a 21st century fight. China's anti-access area denial strategy includes the strategic placement of several different kinds of long-range anti-ship weapons, like the DF-21D, carrier killer as it's often called, medium-range ballistic missile, the DF-ZF, hypersonic anti-ship glide vehicle, and the quite new YJ-21 medium-range anti-ship missile. All of these weapons have publicly claimed ranges of more than 930 miles, with some reaching out to further than 1,200. And that is a big problem for the US Navy. American carrier strike groups are, hands down, America's most potent form of force projection, with more firepower on hand than can be found in many entire nations. And a great deal of that combat power comes directly from the carrier air wing strike fighters, which usually include around 34 FA-18 Super Hornets and 10 F-35C Lightning IIs, along with another 5 to 7 EA-18G Growlers that are based on the Super Hornet. Now, the Super Hornet has an unclassified combat radius, or the distance it can fly out, launch ordnance, and still fly back without refueling, of just about 511 miles. And the F-35C is generally understood to have a much greater combat radius at just about 770 miles. And you might have already spotted the problem here. Both of these fighters offer a shorter combat radius than the maximum reach of China's anti-ship weapons, meaning the Navy could not launch combat sorties against China with its current carrier air wings, at least without putting its multi-billion-dollar supercarriers at risk of being sunk. Of course, you're unlikely to find any less welcoming airspace than that immediately surrounding an American aircraft carrier, and the US Navy has been fielding a variety of new interceptors and other means of bringing down these carrier-killing missiles. But it is important to understand that no air defense is impenetrable, and all air defense systems have what's known as a saturation point, or the point in which you simply don't have enough interceptors to bring down all of the incoming threats. Now, launching that many missiles at once would be very expensive and difficult for China, as would actually targeting a moving carrier at sea from 4-digit ranges. But successfully sinking a $13 billion aircraft carrier with 70 tactical aircraft and more than 4,500 sailors and Marines on board would certainly make the juice worth China's squeeze. And both China and the United States are aware of that. In fact, war games carried out by both the Pentagon and the Center for Strategic and International Studies simulating an American defense against a Chinese invasion of Taiwan repeatedly saw the US Navy losing aircraft carriers as the fighting played out, often 2, but sometimes as many as 4, depending on decisions made throughout the war games. Now, in most of the 24 separate iterations of this conflict played out by the CSIS, America lost both forward-deployed aircraft carriers in the Pacific within just the first 2 days. But it is worth noting, the United States still did come out on top in all but the most extreme iterations of these war games. But with losses that staggering, it's still tough to call that a win. So, while the Navy's F/A-XX fighter program ultimately sought to carry larger payloads internally than the F-35C, coordinate AI-enabled drones, bring new sensors to bear, and more, one of the most important new requirements was and is a combat radius that's at least 25% better than today's F-35C, which would mean a minimum combat radius of around 960 miles, or a bit better than a good portion of China's anti-ship weapons. Now, this increase in range, combined with standoff munitions that can cover hundreds of miles on their own, and the Navy's new MQ-25 Stingray refueling drones, would make it entirely feasible for carrier strike groups to launch combat sorties against Chinese anti-ship and anti-air defensive systems, as well as coastal command and control assets, to effectively fight a hole into that anti-access area denial strategy, to sail closer and then bring its F-35s to bear as well. Like the Air Force, the Navy turned to America's three prime fighter contractors for this new jet. Lockheed Martin, who built both the F-22 and F-35, Boeing, who was a partner on the F-22 effort and currently builds the F-15EX and F-A-18 Super Hornet, and Northrop Grumman, who's a partner on the F-35 program and currently builds the B-21 Raider. In July of 2024, rather than awarding the contract to build its new fighter as expected, the Air Force placed its program on hold, pending a new administration and some difficult decisions about how to fund the effort. But during this time, the Navy was open about continuing work on F/A-XX. In March of 2025, Lockheed Martin was eliminated from that competition, leaving the Navy's F/A-XX contract to either Boeing or Northrop Grumman. And just 17 days later, Lockheed would get more bad news when the Air Force announced that Boeing had won the contract to build the Raptor's replacement. Rumors immediately started swirling that a Navy decision might follow very closely behind, but then something changed behind closed doors at the White House. Originally, the plan was to field the Air Force's new fighter in the early to mid-2030s, and the Navy's new fighter shortly thereafter, allowing the F/A-XX to arrive in sufficient numbers by the end of the 2030s to replace the earliest delivered Super Hornets that would probably be reaching the ends of their service lives by then, with an estimated 9,000 accumulated flight hours. But then, in June, the Trump administration's proposed fiscal year 2026 defense budget arrived with a whopping $3.5 billion allocated to continue working on the Air Force's new F-47, while also slashing the Navy's F/A-XX budget by a whopping 84% year over year, cutting it down to just $74 million to finalize designs and effectively just keep the program alive, though on life support. According to multiple news outlets at the time, this decision was made at the highest levels of the Pentagon due to concerns that America's industrial base could not handle building two high-end fighters at the same time. And as one unnamed defense official put it, quote, "The presidential priority was to go all in on the F-47. Now, this concern was later echoed by the newly appointed Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, who cited the Navy's ongoing shipbuilding woes as a driver behind this decision. I'll quote him now. "All of our programs are a mess, to be honest. Our best performing program is 6 months late and 57% over budget." But even amid the politics of the Hill, it was clear that while the Navy Secretary and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth believed the F/A-XX program should be kicked down the road, the Navy's military leadership was not as convinced. That same day, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral James Kilby didn't openly disagree with the branch's civilian leaders, but he did emphasize the importance of the program, highlighting that it's the threat environment, not budget debates, that dictate what the force needs to win. I'll quote him now. "I believe the sixth-generation fighter is necessary for the Navy, just as it is for the Air Force. The thing that drives that necessity is the threat. It's important to continue onward here because I think China is not slowing down, and we shouldn't slow down either." Then the Admiral raises a good point. Not only is China now working toward fielding its second fifth-generation stealth fighter for both Air Force and Navy carrier duty in the J-35, but it also currently has at least two even more modern fighters in active development. These aircraft, generally known as the Chengdu J-36 and the Shenyang J-50, have been spotted conducting test flights over China since December of 2024. But real confirmation that the Navy brass was not happy with the F/A-XX program being gutted came about 1 month later, when the Navy released its annual unfunded priorities list, which effectively amounts to a wish list for programs the Navy currently can't fund, but would sure like to. And right at the top of that list was $1.4 billion for continued work on the F/A-XX fighter, clearly suggesting that the Navy believes America's fighter industrial base could manage development on both Air Force and Navy fighters at the same time. I'll quote the Navy's justification now. This additional funding will enable Navy to award the 6th Generation Strike Fighter contract to industry. The Navy's 6th Generation Strike Fighter aircraft is a critical component of both the Future Carrier Strike Group and the Air Wing of the Future. And the Navy brass are not alone on this. Boeing Defense and Space CEO Steve Parker directly contradicted concerns about the industrial base in a press conference held on June 16th, claiming that Boeing alone had the engineering and production capacity to design, build, and field both new fighters if they did manage to win the Navy's contract. And the firm has invested some $5 billion into expanding its production facilities in recent years with that distinct possibility in mind. I'll quote him now. Our strategy was to be able to do both, win both, and execute both. So yeah, absolutely we can do it, and so can the industrial base, and so can the engine manufacturers, so I don't see that as being an issue. Of course, it is important to bear in mind that Boeing is still pursuing the Navy contract, so Parker has a financial interest in saying the industry could produce both fighters. But disagreement with the decision to postpone F/A-XX isn't relegated to those who would benefit from continuing it, nor is it specific to the White House's critics. Representative Ken Colvert, a Republican from California, also spoke to the press about postponing this fighter, and I'll quote him now. I'm concerned that any hesitancy on our part to proceed with the planned procurement of the 6th Gen fighters for the Navy will leave us dangerously outmatched in a China fight. We cannot wait. Further, we cannot expect to grow the industrial base by undermining aviation programs that rely on highly specialized supply chains and skilled labor that cannot be turned off and on like a switch. And Calvert is not the only lawmaker pushing for F/A-XX to continue. Earlier this month, the House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee released its budget markup that also seeks to bring funding back to the F/A-XX effort, with an additional $972 million earmarked for the jet's development. But in response, the White House released a statement of administration policy that swiped back at that budget boost. I'll quote it directly. The administration appreciates the committee's commitment to fielding timely 6th Generation fighter aircraft. However, the administration strongly supports reevaluating the F/A-XX program due to industrial-based concerns of 2 6th Generation fighter programs occurring simultaneously. Awarding the F/A-XX contract as written is likely to delay the higher priority F-47 program, with low likelihood of improving the timeline to field a Navy 6th Generation fighter. And that's where the F/A-XX program stands for now, caught in this limbo between Navy leadership and a growing contingent of lawmakers who want it funded, and the White House's concerns over the defense industrial base. And as frustrating as it might be for those of us outside the confines of classified briefing rooms, it's honestly pretty hard to say who's right from our vantage point. On the one hand, I might argue that the Navy needs the F/A-XX program to move forward much sooner than later. Otherwise, the United States runs the risk of sailing more than $1 trillion worth of aircraft carriers around that wouldn't be much use in a high-end fight at best, and risks losing several of those multi-billion-dollar carriers at worst. But on the other hand, Navy acquisitions are clearly struggling, and while shipbuilding is not the same as building new fighter jets, even America's massive military expenditures do have limits. It seems unlikely to me that funding F/A-XX could delay work on the F-47, as long as the Pentagon doesn't pull funds from one to pay for the other anyway, but it is still possible that developing both jets at once could lead to redundant efforts and wasted money. Building the F-47 first could allow the F/A-XX program to leverage lessons learned from it to speed up the process, once it actually begins anyway. But ultimately, the question of funding F/A-XX today or not really comes down to one question: whether or not you believe the United States could find itself in a fight with China in the not too distant future. Postponing the FAXX effort is, for better or worse, betting that a war with China will not happen anytime in the next 10 to 15 years at minimum. It means believing that America has time to complete 2 full fighter development cycles and get them both into service before such a fight breaks out. But conversely, funding FAXX today means betting that Boeing or potentially Northrop Grumman, along with the long list of suppliers under the umbrellas of each, have the engineering, logistical, and industrial capacity to simultaneously develop and build 2 groundbreaking new jets at the same time without significant enough delays or cost overruns to sideline either of these programs. Now, it will almost certainly cost more to develop both jets at once, but if war were to come at any point in the 2030s, that added cost could arguably be well worth it. So, as usual, I'll leave it up to you to decide which argument makes more sense to you. In fact, I'd love to hear if you support postponing the FAXX program or funding it right away. So sound off in the comments below, and I'll make a post about which side got the most votes. And if you're interested, I can get back to work on another video about potential stopgaps and alternatives to FAXX, like extending the range of the F-35C with the stealthy underwing drop tanks being developed right now for the F-22, and the potential pros and cons of relying on that alone for a high-end fight. Again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or your mobile device right now by following the link in the description below. And again, new and returning players who haven't played in 6 months will also receive a major bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles and tons of other goodies. This deal is only available for a limited time, so don't miss out. And with that, ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.